I'm Samuel Slaney, and for years now, I've been intrigued with the notion of remote living. Since I can remember, family holidays have always consisted of adventures, made possible through motorhomes, caravans, and more recently, narrowboats. The latter is something that fascinates me the most. The ability to live a free and fulfilling life in a cosy house floating elegantly on the calm waters of the historic canals. I'm intrigued to know more. Join me over the next 30 minutes as I catch up with BBC and YouTube star Robbie Cumming, journalist of 50 years and narrowboat guru Peter Underwood, as well as YouTube stars Matt and Ali from Boat and Beyond, all of whom will be helping me to understand what modern day life on a narrowboat is really like. But before we meet these guests and hear their stories, let me first take you back to the industrial period, where remote living first began. From the late 18th to the early 20th century, narrowboats were originally working boats used to carry goods on the narrow canals. When they first started operating, narrowboats were hauled by horses who'd walk on the canal towpaths located either side. Typically, these would be led by a crew member who, believe it or not, was often a child. Now, if I just look to my right, I can actually see, somewhat in the distance, a young lad with who I'd presume is his dad. And they look like, well, the dad looks like he's teaching his son to ride a bike. And it's just crazy to think that a couple of 100 years ago, I'm sure that the lad would have been learning to steer a horse, not steer a bike. Whilst this was happening, men would work on the boats whilst their families stayed on land. As time went on, with increased competition from the railways, it was no longer viable for the boatmen to keep a house on land. So to get around this, the long-distance boatmen moved their families onto the boats to work as unpaid crew. Inside, you'd find a warm stove, a steaming kettle, painted housewares, decorated plates, anything you'd find in a traditional home. And it was enough to live comfortably, albeit in a more confined space. This normalised what's still known to this day as the boatman's cabin, renowned for its space-saving ingenuity and its cosy and warm interior, meaning that the living quarters resembled that of a traditional house. It's important to remember that during this time, there were many workers in harder indoor trades with unhealthier conditions and much worse accommodation. It often meant that them and their families were separated for long hours, rather than being together all day like the boatmen with their families, or crew members if you like, on the narrowboats. Whilst this was definitely a gentler way of life in what was such an intense period of time, like everything, it did have its disadvantages. Because they were constantly on the move, it just wasn't possible for these families to send their children to school, and so most boat people remained illiterate compared to those living on land. Now, in the early 20th century, it became possible to move more cargo with the same manpower by towing another unpowered boat. These were commonly referred to as butty boats. Essentially, this meant that there was no horse to look after, but there still had to be a crew member steering the butty, unless it was a wide canal, where it could be roped up side to side and handled as one while working the locks. I'm currently 22 years of age. I'm a student. I still live with my parents, and at the moment I have absolutely no intention of buying a house. Now, whilst that last point is partly down to me not yet having that kind of money, it's also down to this more certified method of reasoning. With a consistent increase in house prices amidst shortages of available homes, the idea of moving into a house made of bricks and mortar isn't actually that appealing to me, and as it happens, isn't that accessible anyway. According to thisismoney.co.uk, house prices have risen by 6.5% since March last year, meaning that on average, prices have risen by over £1,000 a month. Suddenly, this idea of remote living by means of a narrowboat appeals to me even more. It makes me consider the logistics of putting this plan into action and makes me want to know more as to why other people choose this style of living. Intrigued to find out more, I caught up with Robbie Cumming. You may recognise his name from his work with the BBC, in which Robbie shares his experience on his 300-mile adventure across the Midlands and Northern England with his naughty lass. No, I'm not referring to his girlfriend when I say that. I'm actually referring to the name of his narrowboat.
My boat is called the Naughty Lass, and it's quite simply a pun on Nautilus. Specifically the Nautilus, the submarine type craft from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Jules Verne novel, which I have read a couple of times. I wouldn't say it's my favourite book ever, but I do love it, and I've got a copy on board. And I just like making people laugh, really, because when they pass by, generally dirty old men, they pass by and they go, "Whoa, naughty lass!" They obviously don't read many books.
Robbie also has an impressive YouTube channel in which he independently documents his narrowboat adventures throughout the historic canals. He's lived on a narrowboat now for over 5 years, and he's been vlogging for 4 of those. Quite frankly, it makes it look easy. I was keen to find out how he first started.
I don't remember deciding that I was going to live on a narrowboat. I think it kind of happened to me after I was given the opportunity to try it. And something I'm very passionate about now. I think everyone should have the opportunity to do it if they want to try a different way of living. And at my time of life, I was in my early 30s, wasn't on the housing ladder, didn't really know where I was going to live, didn't want to be with my parents anymore, obviously, although that is a very common thing for people to be forced into doing. And I decided, do you know what, I've got nothing to lose, so I might as well try and live inside a steel box for a little bit, see how that goes. And yeah, once I got on that tiller and started moving the boat around, I was just sold. That was the life for me. Just exploring these waterways that seem to be a hidden passageway throughout the UK.
One of the biggest things I admire about Robbie is the fact that he's completely remote. I think the reason that this is so impressive to me is the fact that he can live and work on the calm canals, provided, of course, that there's enough signal for a decent internet connection.
I had a work from home job that I knew I could do in one location, but I didn't know if I could do it in, basically unknown spots around the UK where I didn't know what the signal was going to be like for internet, for example. The technology was there, it just become more readily available of the mobile Wi-Fi devices, and they were just about that stage where they were more reliable to be able to use. So I got one of those, and I did try it out beforehand in certain cafes in London, for example, but that's London. I mean, it's going to have a good signal anyway, isn't it, in most areas of London. So it really was a bit of a risk that I took. And some days I had to walk up to the top of a hill and call my boss, who was very forgiving, and I had to say, look, I'm just going to have to move the boat, take some time off during the day to move the boat to a location where I can actually get a signal. Not ideal, and I've got to thank my boss Kimberly for being so forgiving with that one, because that is the problem. Working on an narrowboat, it's very hard to have a 9-to-5 life, especially when you're moving it around as much as I do.
The ability to work remotely is powerful, especially in the testing times of today. What with the global pandemic and all that. Since the pandemic, remote jobs have become more freely available and have meant that remote living is more accessible than it's ever been. Actually, it's a trend that's been on the up since 2005. Over the past 16 years, there's been an increase of 159% in remote work opportunities, and that's according to merchantsavvy.co.uk, so it's a certified source. It's worth mentioning that technology has a huge part to play in this astonishing statistic. Perhaps this is a reason as to why the popularity around narrowboats has increased in the modern day. It's not just through this ability to work from anywhere, but because of this innate craving to escape back to much simpler times. Back in the industrial period, people felt ostracised through living on a boat, and it was perhaps looked down on by the majority of society. Yet now it's one of the main reasons as to why people pursue this mode of alternative living. Peter Underwood is a former journalist who's lived on a narrowboat now for over 18 years, so it's safe to say he knows a thing or two about the community.
You don't live within one community, as most people do in a house. You don't get to know your neighbours, you don't have a local pub, you don't have that sense of community around you that you in theory have on land. But in my experience, not a lot of that is actually true on land. In contrast, the canal system is in fact a 2,000 mile long village. There are only a few thousand boats on it. Over the years you get to know an enormous number of them. Some of them become really good friends. You meet up at festivals and events, so you tend to drink together, you go to the same pubs on those occasions. And it's a really strange thing because you make really good friends, you go in your direction, they go in their direction, and 2 years later, maybe, your paths or your boats cross again, and you stop and you catch up and you have a drink and you sit on the towpath in the sunshine and you gossip about the other people and the places that you've been. You complain bitterly about the Canal and River Trust to one another, and there's always something to complain about. But you're just as good friends as if you'd seen them the day before. That interval on the canal system doesn't seem to make any difference somehow. We've got some excellent friends who we haven't seen. Some we saw 2 years ago, some might be 5 years ago, but we know that when we get together again, it'll be as if that interval had never happened. And the canal, the waterways, particularly the boats and boaters that live upon the waterways, that is a genuine community. Just that it doesn't abide by the rules of a community of place. It's a community of the like-minded. It's worth it because of the people. The people are what makes the difference when it comes to living and travelling on a boat. Because boat people are something special, I think.
Stars of the Boating Beyond YouTube channel, Matt and Ali, echo Peter's statement.
For the most part, they're pretty amazing. I think, like with everything, you definitely have some characters, but I guess the best way that I could describe it is like sort of one big, probably slightly messy family. I think there's always someone to lend a hand, and we've met some really incredible people and definitely made some lifelong friends whilst we've been on our journey.
Yeah, the good outweigh the bad, but I have proper met some weirdos.
These weirdos that Matt's referring to are probably gongoozlers like me at this current moment. People who stroll the towpaths and enjoy watching the activity on the canals. As I walk this towpath, I'm appreciative of the serene and peaceful atmosphere that surrounds these historic canals. You have to think, anyone who's around these canal towpaths are part of the narrowboat community, at least at that particular time. Whether it's a runner using this area as part of their route, whether it's an artist taking a stroll in the hopes of gathering inspiration, or even spectators or gongoozlers as they're known in the narrowboat world. Which makes me wonder, how does one go from being a gongoozler to a narrowboat cruiser? Well, in the case of Matt and Ali, who'd lived on boats before, it was a natural progression.
Yeah, it was, to be honest. I've always loved being on the water, so purchasing a narrowboat was always something that I wanted to do, but I sort of had to find the right person to do it with. I didn't want to do it on my own. I've lived on my own before, and I'm glad that I met Ali, and everything sort of tied together, and we followed our dreams, or my dreams, and now they're her dreams as well.
For Peter, though, it was health reasons that led him to boating live.
In a way, it was an extension of a decision we took after I had a heart attack some 20 odd years ago. We decided there were more important things in life than the business I was running at the time. And we'd moved to Spain, but family reasons brought us back. And we'd had boats, and including narrowboats, before as hobbies, as part of a leisured lifestyle, if you like. So when we came back, that was the easy option.
Now, some people spend years having a boat custom made to their specific taste. However, Peter went about it in a rather interesting way.
We bought a boat unseen. We simply told our daughter, go, here's a budget, buy us a boat that we can actually live on for a while. It was perhaps an impetuous decision, but certainly one that we've never regretted.
The decision to let his daughter buy the boat is definitely an unorthodox approach, but it's certainly paid off for him and his family.
And we ended up with a boat that has no fewer than 7 berths, which may be something to do with our children and our grandchildren being able to come and visit us. At least I think that was the thought in my daughter's mind. And how did we achieve it? Well, we'd sold up the 4-bedroom house that we'd owned when we moved to Spain, so we had a little bit of spare cash, and that went into the boat. So fairly simple, really, and I do appreciate that it's not that simple for most people. We had some previous experience, we had the money, we liked being on a boat, so that's where we ended up.
I love the fact that most of these narrowboats have names, so inevitably I asked Peter what the name of his boat was and how he came about the name.
It's called Blackberry Way. It was my wife's idea. We renamed it when we first bought it because we didn't like the previous name. It's called Blackberry Way because we are of that generation that recall that wonderful song by The Move, and because the canals are sort of a blackberry way. You travel along them in the autumn and there are blackberries wherever you look.
Once you've decided that you want to pursue this alternative lifestyle, you then have to factor in the financial logistics.
I think for most people it is really difficult starting out because first of all you have the financial aspects. Particularly at the present time, there aren't many boats that cost less than £25,000-30,000, and that's still a big lump of money even in this day and age for people to find, particularly young couples or people on their own. We have seen over the years many divorced people, men mostly, but some women, who've moved onto a boat with their share of the house sale. You used to be able to get some marine finance, but it's quite frankly become much more expensive now than simply putting it on your credit card or taking out an unsecured loan. It's one of those things, if you want to afford it, you'll find a way, particularly if you want a boat for a home.
Financially, I needed some money from family, so I borrowed off my auntie because the interest rates were so low, and although she had some money from my uncle's life insurance as he passed away, there's nothing she could have done with it. So she said, well, Robbie, you might as well take a loan out, not from the bank, but from me. And which is good, because I was struggling to get a loan from the bank, because as soon as they heard that I was going to live on the thing that I was trying to borrow money for, they were dead against it, as you can imagine.
So we started by making sure that it would be financially possible for us. So we got together our savings and handed in our notices for our jobs. And then it came to selling the boat that we lived on at the time. And then we started searching for a narrowboat. It became quite a tricky process for us because obviously we needed to find somewhere to live, but with the help of our friend, we managed to travel quite a lot of the UK and find a narrowboat that suited us.
Over the past year, my routine has taken, well, a bit of a beating, and I think it has something to do with the global pandemic. With how drastically my routine has changed this year, it makes me appreciate the complete change in lifestyle that must come about from switching bricks and mortar to life on the waterways.
So what does your routine look like? Well, I think the whole point is there isn't one. There are certain jobs that have to be done when you live on a narrowboat. It depends on what your job is, whether you're retired or whether you're working. It depends too on where you are, whether you're travelling, whether you're on a mooring. If you're travelling, there are certain routines. With us, it used to be every 3-4 days. We'd untie the ropes and head off to the next place, the next destination, wherever it was we were going at the time, whether that was running down the Grand Union Canal to London or up the Leeds and Liverpool and across to the Lancaster. You have to travel a certain time each day. So your routine really, I suppose, starts with the normal things in the morning, getting up, topping up the stove if it's winter, cooking breakfast, having a cup of tea, having a shower, and then deciding what the rest of the day holds for you. And if you're a continuous cruiser, you don't have a fixed mooring, that will probably involve at least once a week, or maybe once every 2 weeks at most, starting the boat up, untying the lines, pushing the bow out, and heading onwards to whatever your next destination is.
Robbie's also a continuous cruiser.
My routine is very dependent on my mood. Some days I won't even want to get up. Some days I'll be up at the crack of dawn, ready to film something because my job is filmmaking, making YouTube videos or presenting and filming for the BBC. And yeah, so it does depend on weather. Some nice hot sunny days I'd rather be sitting by the side of the boat, maybe a beer in my hand or having a barbecue. But I can't really do that, as if I'm on a filming schedule and there's a drone pilot standing by for when it's nice weather, then we've got to go, got to film that day. And obviously sometimes it does rain so much that it's just not worth moving the boat around. So some days I might be moving the boat, other days I might not be. I might be inside cooking, having just a relaxing sort of Sunday where I'm just eating pancakes and drinking coffee. And then other times it'll be all go, really hectic and quite stressful at times, trying to find a mooring and trying to get my laundry done, and trying to meet up with people that's got to be done at a certain time. So it can be very difficult, but at the same time very relaxing, just depending on what day it is.
I always thought that living on a narrowboat would demand a strict routine in general.
For us, our routine changes daily. For the most part, it's no different to living in a house. However, some days we may need to move the water and other services, but as continuous cruisers, we also need to move the boat a certain number of miles a year, and moorings have some restrictions, so we factor this into our routine. We do document and film a lot of our journeys, and also have, we love to travel. Some of our best days are when we've chosen to move.
I also thought that cats didn't like water, but Matt and Ali's cat, Mr. Jinx, is unique in his own right. Ali, how has Mr. Jinx adapted to life on the canals?
He didn't actually take that much adapting, as we were always home as well, so we had plenty of time to make sure that he settled in. He's a pretty chilled out cat as well, and he just loves being nosy out the windows. But to be honest, his favourite spot is probably just sitting on one of our laps and cuddling up. So as long as we're home, he's a pretty happy boy.
So essentially, your routine is somewhat dictated by the type of licence you hold. Personally, I think if I was to live on a narrowboat full time, I'd be a continuous cruiser. And with that, I'd stand a better chance at attempting to cover the some 2,000 miles of UK waterways. When you travel this often, you come across some funny characters and enlightening moments.
A lot of stuff happens to me on the canals, which I find hilarious. Even when I'm just talking to people in a pub, for example. There was one in Lee, right by the canal, and I was in there just at the bar having a beer, and a woman pipes up and she says, "So, where are you from then?" And I said, "Well, from down in Dorset." "What are you doing up here then?" she said. And I said, "Well, I've come to see all the industrial heritage. You know, I'm really excited to explore the north. I've never been up it before. I'm just loving all these old canals and the mill buildings and all the old factories that you just don't see down south." And she just turned back to me and said, "Come to see how the other half live." And I just thought that sums it all up, really. Sort of perverse tourism that northerners have to sort of put up with. I'm generalising because there are a lot of people who live up north who love it. They love the industrial history side of it, and they're really proud of the Northern Powerhouse. But there's many families who have been through a lot of heartbreak because of job losses and things, you know, all linked to the mines and Thatcher closing them, and so there is a lot of ill feeling that I initially felt when I was travelling up north. But I fell in love with it now, and I count myself as a southern northerner because, well, I live here with my girlfriend and her daughter, and I'm happier than ever thought I could be, even though I've got one foot on water and the other foot on land now. So what I call home is where my family is. It's where my girlfriend and her daughter is. So, yeah, things have changed a lot from exploring the waterways, and I've certainly achieved what I didn't think I was setting out to achieve.
As Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. once said, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." This is certainly the case for Peter, who's now had to move off his narrowboat for health reasons.
Yeah, we're moving off. We've just moved off. In fact, I'm recording this in an apartment. Why? Well, sort of personal, physical reasons, really. My leg gives way underneath me without telling me it's going to do that, and that tends to be slightly dangerous around lumps of steel and water and on the edges of locks. And my wife's not as well as she used to be, so we've always said that if we got to the point where we couldn't physically manage boating properly anymore and it ceased to be fun, then we'd stop. So we've stopped. What do we miss? Well, all those things I've just explained to you, really. That sense of community and being part of something different and having a fairly unique and sense of freedom, I suppose. I've never taken kindly to being tied to one place, but I'm sure I can manage it for my last few years. Boating is a strange thing. It's mucky and messy. It's cold and it's wet. It can be miserable. But it's worth it because of the people. The people are what makes the difference when it comes to living and travelling on a boat. Because boat people are something special, I think.